G'day folks. In this video today, I'm going to go through my 2023 AFL season predictions. And then what I'll do at the end is go through what I predict the ladder order will be, and I'll go through a bit of the why as well. So Premier for me will be Brisbane this year, and the reasons being you've got the additions of Dunkley, you've got the addition of Gunston, and you've also got the addition of young Will Ashcroft. So with those additions, I think that'll substantially help Brisbane. And Connor McKenna may also be of help additionally as a component in defence. But with Dunkley, with the defensive presence that he provides, the second option is that sort of second contested ball winner around stoppages. With Ashcroft, you've got another ball winner, but you've also got the acceleration out of stoppages as well for a bit of balance. And then Gunston up forward, well, he's a huge option. So really one of the premier avenues to goal over the years, and someone who really converts his opportunities at an elite rate. So adding all those components to Brisbane, well, I think it takes them over the top and makes them genuinely, at least on paper, the team to beat. So watch out everyone else. Runner-up, I think Geelong is a likely team to make it to the grand final, and if they don't, I think they'll be very, very close to doing so. They've historically been consistently thereabouts and able to get very, very close. So yeah, I don't think there'll be a substantial drop-off this year. And when you've got some pretty good additions as well coming in the door, so whether you've got a Tanner Bruin, you've got the likes of a Jack Bowes, you've got Henry as well, who was added from Collingwood. He may or may not establish himself this year necessarily as a best 22, but I certainly think Bruin does, and then Bowes is a pretty good chance as well. With those sort of additions, a few missing out on the grand final team as well with capabilities as well. I think Geelong still do have that upside to be a genuine premiership contender again this year. So I need to give them that suitable credit accordingly, because I do think they'll be a very hard team to beat again. And even with their age, I don't think that matters. It didn't matter last year, and I don't think it'll matter this year either. Minor Premier Brisbane, again, as the strongest team, in my opinion, at least this year. I think they've got a good chance to be the Minor Premier. Most improved, again, Brisbane, if they're going from their current spot to Premier, unless there's a bigger rise, which at least at this stage I'm not sort of necessarily seeing, I do think Brisbane could be that most improved. Biggest team decline, I'm going with Collingwood. I'll give a bit more insight into why a bit later on in the video, but it's basically down to looking at the percentage of... So when you've got, obviously, the ladder, you've got, obviously, how many games you've won, but then you've also got the percentage as an indicator. And Collingwood's indicator from a percentage perspective isn't all that positive when you really compare it. So I'll go into that in a bit more depth later. But yeah, Wooden Spoon, probably West Coast for me. Could be North Melbourne. They're the two really near bottom sort of, I guess, teams that will be contending for the spoon, it looks like, at this stage. But I do see probably incrementally more upside with North Melbourne. So just getting a Cunnington back. You've added 2 high picks in the past draft. So you've got Wardlaw, Sheasel. So we'll have to see how much those new additions help in North Melbourne. But yeah, with West Coast, they're an aging list. So it's a bit harder to see the upside with a West Coast versus North Melbourne, where at least there's parts where I think they can make some steps. Coleman, I think probably Jeremy Cameron will be the leading goal kicker this year. I think he's got a good chance, particularly with Hawkins aging, maybe some doubts around his health. With them sort of 1 and 2 respectively in the goal kicking last year, if Hawkins misses a few games, I think that only helps a Jeremy Cameron at the end of the day. Rising star, I think it'll be Will Ashcroft. You've obviously got Sam Darcy, who I think is going to be a sensational footballer. But yeah, look, with an Ashcroft, he's just that advanced already that, he has to be the guy to beat. I think his impact will be comparable with year 1 Nick Dacos. At least conditional on if Brisbane give Ashcroft a high percentage of CBAs. So I'd be looking at a CBA percentage of minimum 50 plus, really, for him to really have the impact that he should be having. And I think you could even boost it quite a bit higher. For me, he's really sort of, after you've got the likes of Neil and Dunkley, I think Ashcroft would be that third midfielder for Brisbane as soon as this year, honestly, in terms of CBAs or how often he should be attending. Brownlow, I think possibly a Josh Dunkley. The thing I find with the Brownlow is it's really those that win a high, I guess, percentage, but then also amount of total contested possessions tend to really feature quite highly. And often it's on those teams where there's not too many other superstars through the midfield. So with Brisbane, well, who's Dunkley sharing the votes with? Well, probably mostly it's Neil. So therefore, I think he's sort of a better chance at a Brisbane than, say, if he was at the Dogs, where you've got the likes of a Bont and McRae. There's too many of those sort of star mids on that one list to take the votes. So I think Dunkley, who I think is going to have a ripping year this year, will be one of the players in the mix. But yeah, I'm not usually a huge sort of Brownlow watcher. Recruit of the year, I think it has to be Josh Dunkley. Brisbane were lacking that sort of second premier midfielder behind Neil, and really having that sort of second contested ball winner, but also with that defensive side as well. I think that's really going to be the difference maker this year with Brisbane. That will make the world of difference, truthfully. Most improved, I think that'll be Tom Green. Losing Hopper, losing Taranto as well from that GWS midfield, I think it really opens up the opportunity for Green to take over and make the midfield his. So I think he'll become the premier first possession winner in the competition, and I think that'll happen this year. So it'll be a lot of win first possession, dish it out by hand. You'll have a Callahan on the outside receiving a lot of the time. So I think we'll be seeing a lot of that dynamic in play with the Giants this year. Surprise All-Australian selection, I'll go with Tom Green. So if you look through the best midfielders in the comp, and you can only have so many midfielders in your best team, well, not many people would be saying that Tom Green at this stage is one of the best midfielders in the comp, or one of those premier options. Well, I think this year is going to prove himself and establish himself as that. So yeah, watch for Tom Green this year. Coach of the year, I'm going Chris Fagan, just because if Brisbane make that step to be the premiership team, it's pretty hard to go past that when your team is making that big step. But as for the ladder, so this is always the interesting one, and for me it's always about team performance. That's what really matters, much more so than any individual awards. So I've got here obviously the 2022 ladder and how things looked, and we've got here my, I guess, 2023 ladder. So the things you'll notice, obviously you've got Brisbane as the big riser, and then you'll have a lot of the same sorts of names. So I think Richmond are probably going to make a jump just because they've now actually got a midfield, so that really helps them. So having Taranto and Hopper, that's going to help them, assuming they can sort of maintain enough sort of speed and run around the ground. I think that makes them a dangerous team. Sydney, look, I do think they'll take a slight step back. I think they'll still be a very good team, though. Reason being predominantly is I think with Buddy, I don't think we'll see a full season from him. So if he's playing a lot less games, you've got a Sam Reid who also has a substantial injury history. So I do think that step back will really be, in particular from the front half, will be seeing that. But Sydney have a lot of good youth who will still be rising. So I think they'll still be a top 4 contender and a really competitive side. So Fremantle we've got next. Look, I think they'll be sort of placed in a similar position. The reason I can't put them higher as yet is just because I see some improvement from the likes of Brisbane and Richmond. So it really makes it hard to, I guess, boost their position. But with the addition of a Luke Jackson, I do think at the same time they'll be incrementally a stronger player, a stronger team, even though they are, for the purposes of this ladder, one position lower than they were placed last year. But very potent team, Fremantle, and I think they'll be dangerous again. And they've got quite a good amount of youth that will continue to improve. So I do think that there's quite a bit of upside over the next few seasons for Fremantle to become a top 4 team and plausibly even a contender in the future. So they're definitely a list to watch. And particularly if a Fife gets up and going, though, I don't think we'll necessarily see the Fife we have in years past, unfortunately. I think that's well past him, which will be a shame, but we'll have to see what happens there. Next up, Port Adelaide. So I think they're going to be I think they're going to be the team to jump into the top 8 from outside. Historically, we've pretty much always had a team from outside the top 8 actually make the jump into the top 4. So if that's to happen, Port Adelaide are, for me at least, the most probable. And when you're adding a Horn Francis, well, that's going to be one of the contributing factors. But then you've got the likes of a Rosie who probably takes a few more steps. And we'll have to see if Port Adelaide's veterans can hold up and continue playing good footy. I think that'll also really matter for them as well. But if we look at their percentage last year, so at 110%, well, that's better than a fair few of the top 8 teams. So even based on strength of play last year, well, they were really playing as a top 8 team. Even if in the win-loss column, it doesn't necessarily suggest that that's the case. So for me, I'm a big proponent of looking at a team's percentage as that real strength of play indicator that more accurately represents what is likely for the next few seasons as a projection. So look, given that, I do think Port Adelaide are most likely a top 8 team this year. Again, just based on sort of how good or how capable they looked last year. And they, even though they started poorly, they came on quite well and became quite a good team after that slow start at least. The Dogs, look, I've currently got them in 8th, so I have them holding firm. Obviously, you've got that boost in terms of having better key position players and really looking strong in all the key position posts around the ground. So that definitely matters. But with that said, losing a Josh Dunkley through the midfield I think also matters. So I'm not sure necessarily whether the Dogs midfield will work hard enough defensively. I think that's an area where they're going to get shown up quite a bit and possibly get exposed. So something to be aware of there for the Dogs. But basically, even though it's a talented list, and I do think they are on paper a more talented list than 8th, I don't think necessarily the execution is going to be there as a team to really, I guess, be that top 4 team or contender that perhaps some Dogs fans might believe them to be this year. Carlton, they're a top 8 chance. They, a bit like a Port Adelaide, they could even have the upside of about 4th. So they're a team in the mix. And again, if you look at the percentage, well, they were pretty close to a top 8 team. And if not for Collingwood winning, well, in that final game, well, yeah, they would have made it. But if you compare their percentage to, say, a Collingwood, well, they were actually a stronger team last year than Collingwood were, despite Collingwood being a top 4 team and really looking dangerous in that second half of the year. So, look, if Carlton are healthy and all things are firing, they're in the top 8 mix. And although they don't make this top 8, if, say, one of these teams has a few injuries, Carlton could sneak in, is my current thinking. The relative improvement for Carlton is really their outside stocks. They've really sort of started to add to that. So whether it's an Akers, a Hollands, maybe even a Jackson Binns may get a chance at some stage. But basically they've really now got those real outside runners to complement that really strong inside brigade that they've really had in that last year that really looked good. So with a more complete and strong midfield, I do think Carlton will be a more competitive team and really strong in those aspects. But look, in defence, I do think that with Zach Williams out, that hurts them. So there is a few spots in defence that I think they're a bit shaky, and I'd say the same up front as well, where although you've got the twin towers in McKay and you've got Curnow as well, I do think that, they probably do need quite a bit more support up forward to really make it a balanced and less predictable front half would be my feedback with Carlton. So maybe if they find that third option, maybe they can make a push up the ladder, but I'm not really seeing it at this stage with Carlton. So that's my hesitation there. Collingwood at 10th, again, it's down to percentage. So if we look at Collingwood's percentage, well, where would they have actually ranked last year if we sorted the ladder by percentage? Well, that'd be the 10th ranked team. Carlton were higher, Port Adelaide were higher, and all the other top 8 teams were higher as well. So what obviously made Collingwood a top 4 team in the end was they won the close games. And they had a knack of, even though they'd be behind quite late in games, well, they'd really take on the game and really find a way to not only get back in it, but actually just get over the line very late. And they really made a habit of that and really built a lot of confidence. So, but if we eliminate that factor, well, where should they actually sit based on actual strength of play? Well, really, they're the 10th best team in the competition as things stood last year, and really probably may be the case again this year in actually sort of breaking things down. For me, look, losing Grundy does matter, and obviously Collingwood were winning without Grundy. And look, the additions of the likes of, say, a Tom Mitchell certainly helps. Maybe there'll be contributions from some of the others who have been added as well. McStay might be handy structurally up forward. Maybe a Frampton establishes himself in defence. But I'd also say of Collingwood's list that the bulk of their very best players, other than, of course, Nick Dacos, well, they're really at the back end of their career. So you're really hoping that a Scott Pendlebury continues to play good footy, and you're hoping that a Taylor Adams can remain healthy, and you're hoping that a Jeremy Howe remains healthy and productive. So with so many veterans on Collingwood's list that make up, I guess, the better portion of their group, well, I'm not really seeing necessarily that, I guess, complete youth push that's really going to move Collingwood up. And there is that slight concern for me, and I'm saying this as a Collingwood fan as well, that look, the older players will sort of make a slight regression, or at least some combination of them. So given that I don't currently have Collingwood in my top 8, which of course as a Pies fan pains me, but look, I'm just being honest with my views at this point. Gold Coast in 11th, they're another team with top 8 chances I'm not going to dismiss, and particularly with Ben King coming back this year, that's absolutely going to matter. But yeah, there's still a few holes for me. Their defense still looks shaky, and they do need quite a bit of improvement there. Their midfield has become incredibly potent in the last year, so that makes me, I guess, optimistic that they can be thereabouts and at least contending for a top 8 spot. But yeah, ultimately there's other teams that I still believe are better teams at this point. But if you look at their ladder last year, their percentage, well, almost 103. So already last year they were really thereabouts. If you're 100% or better, well, that usually implies that you're pretty close to that top 8 mark. So yeah, and it's really not far off Collingwood's percentage as well. So that really makes them sort of in this rough range at this stage, I would say. But yeah, with a few holes, we'll have to see how things come together for the Suns. St Kilda, look, I do think that Ross Lyon will make the Saints into a competitive team, but for me, there's still probably a few holes there. So look, they could be a team that maybe even pushes into the 8, and they could even be in this sort of slightly higher region. It's easy to make a case. But I am seeing in the midfield quite a vanilla midfield where there's just a lack of, I guess, different components in there. You've got up forward, you've got Max King, who really needs a second option. I'm not seeing the outside run. I'm not seeing the guys who can really take on the game aggressively with the Saints. So, yeah, just based on analysing their list, I do look at Carlton and Collingwood in particular as better teams. And look, Gold Coast, at least with Ben King back, I think are probably maybe slightly better than the Saints. So yeah, I've got the Saints roughly in this region at this stage. And then with the group below, look, I don't think these teams will be top 8 sides, but then again, you can never say never. Unpredictable can and often does happen in footy. So you've got Essendon. I think they've actually got a lot of really good youth, so that'll be the promising component there for Essendon. But will it take them over the line? I'm not necessarily convinced. There's still quite a few pieces lacking across the field, and really sort of that, I guess, defensive buy-in as that component that has really eluded Essendon for the longest time and really stopped them from really being that, I guess, team that can not only make the top 8 but actually win a final. So apologies Essendon fans for bringing that up, but of course I jest. But yeah, with Essendon, ultimately that'll be the thing. If they get things right defensively, that's when we'll start to really see the team progress. And look, a move up from 15th to 13th, well, that would be an incremental improvement. And it's really me acknowledging the quality of some of the youth that Essendon have, and some of the steps that a few of them have the scope to take. So whether it's this year or in coming years, we'll have to see how soon that happens. But yeah, I think there's room for improvement with Essendon to take another step. Adelaide, look, I think they'll be about the same spot, honestly. Obviously, their front half has been upgraded with the addition of Rankin, so that absolutely matters. But with that said, I do think that their defense is still a little bit shaky, but then also through the midfield, I've got similar views with with St Kilda as I do with Adelaide. But yeah, I think they're a bit vanilla through the midfield. So they don't have any sort of taller, big-bodied mids, but they also don't really have that necessarily class, speed, skills through there that you'd really hope that a good team would have. So, and look, I think a Sam Berry will probably take another step up. I really rate him as a young player, so watch out for that additional step made this coming year. But yeah, ultimately, look, with an Adelaide, I do think they're probably in roughly this part of the ladder. I don't think they're a top 8 team this year. I think there's still probably a few pieces missing to really take that step. With a GWS, ultimately, when you're losing the likes of a Taranto and Hopper, well, you can't really improve too much from that. I am moving the Giants up one spot, which is something. I do still think that there's a bit of youth there that can possibly help the Giants improve a touch. In particular, I think with the likes of a Hopper and Taranto out, that just means the next brigade for the Giants can really step up their game. So that means the likes of a Tom Green, a Finn Callahan, I think they'll be really prominent pieces for the Giants through that midfield as well. So, because it was just, the Giants have really been a very unbalanced team for a number of years where they've been very heavy through the midfield, but really lacking everywhere else. Well, what's happened, there's been a clean out through the midfield, and I don't think big picture it really matters all that much. But there's a lot of other deficiencies really around the ground that will have to really be watched for, which is how I'm sort of seeing the Giants at this stage. So I think there's still quite a few steps off being a top 8 team, though you never say never. There is still enough talent there where they do have the scope at least to jump. With Hawthorn, I'm seeing talent both forward and back, but their midfield was the worst in the comp last year, and it's really ultimately gotten worse. When you're losing the likes of Mitchell and O'Meara, well, Hawthorn haven't necessarily replaced that talent. So you'll have the likes of a Josh Ward getting more minutes through there, which will help his development. You've got a Cam McKenzie. I think he'll be prominent through the Hawthorn midfield and be very good for a first-year player. So he's another to watch for as well. But ultimately, it's a development year for Hawthorn's midfield. So accordingly, you can't really expect them to be a top 8 team nor even a top 8 contender. If they do push higher than, say, a 16th, well, I would treat that as a bonus, personally. And then you've got North Melbourne and West Coast really battling it out for last place. So ultimately, I just see a little bit more upside with North Melbourne's list, where there's a few that can take steps to improve. You've got a Cunnington back, so they're relative factors that help. And then with the West Coast, look, it's just an aging list at the end of the day. So that really makes it quite hard, where they don't have the quality of youth to really propel them up and take that next step. So it's a bit like, I'd say, almost of a Collingwood, but to an even greater extent, where it's just too heavy reliance on really those veterans who are really established players. So without that really good core of youth, it's really going to be hard going for West Coast to make progress, not only this year, but really the next few years. I think it's really probably the hardest situation of all the clubs, even a little bit more so than North Melbourne, who at least are starting to introduce a little bit of good youth. There's some of my thoughts. Thanks for watching, folks, and let me know in the comments section below what your season predictions are and where you think things will land a little bit differently to me. Of course, with so many players in the comp and so many teams, I'm sure there will be differences in your thinking compared to mine. So it'll be interesting to, I guess, see where those differences in opinion are at this stage. And it's always curious looking back to see really, I guess, who gets it right and who gets it more right and to what extent. That's always sort of fun for me. But let me know as well if there's any particular sort of AFL analysis or coverage that you'd be interested in hearing from me. I'd be interested to hear in the comment section below, and I'm always open to giving consideration to particular ideas. But if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell for future updates. And I'll see you on the next video.